start with the first, like, biggest basic question.
Okay.
Is, what are your memories inside the Fine Arts Library?
Fine Arts Library. My most recent memory is doing research for Capstone. I think the biggest memory associated with that is just looking for books, looking for artists, or for books associated with artists that have inspired me throughout my art practice. There were a couple artists who, like, I couldn't find books on them, and like, feeling disappointed, but then, like, finding other people that I wanted to come back to in the future. And then talking with my Capstone professor, just, like, sitting with her at a table, and she's someone that I really admire and respect, and she's very, like, I don't know, she's very good at, like, motivating her students, I think, and just, I remember that conversation actually very vividly for some reason, and it kind of gave me a lot to think about with my project, and not only that, but, like, where I wanted to go in the future as an artist. And earlier memories are just going there and doing research, or just sitting there and, like, working on something, because it's such a quiet space. Like, I really like that it's very different from the Bazell or other places on campus, and there are other people that care about fine arts there, so it's nice to have a connection with other people in that same space, even though you don't know who they are.
So, whenever you were having a conversation with your professor, were you in the area? What area specifically?
When you walk in, it's, like, to the left, so there's a bunch of tables. A bunch of my classmates were there at the same time, like, doing research, and she was just kind of going around checking on everyone, and there were some people who had never been in the library, like, up until that point, and we're fine art students, and we're just amazed at the resources they had available to them, and we're just discovering it in the last semester, and how excited they were to, like, find that, but then also, like, well, you're not really going to have access to that much longer, so yeah, but we were at a table just sitting next to each other.
Yeah, so do you think it's important to have spaces like that on campus that are for a specific community? Because you talked a lot about your classmates and having conversations with your professors, so you're kind of highlighting some social aspects.
Yeah.
And so how do you feel about spaces that are for the community, the resources for the community you're a part of?
I definitely think it's important to have spaces like that. That's probably the library I've been in the most. I've also gone to the engineering library a lot because, again, there's not a lot of people, and it's quiet, and I usually can go in and get my things printed really quickly and come back out quickly, and I think that's another space where, like, I'm not a part of that community, but you can see, like, it's a lot of engineering kids, and they're talking about, like, their homework, or they have materials that are relevant to them, and it's nice to go somewhere where it's accessible and everything feels applicable to what you're trying to do with your life, or your, like in our case, our art practice or something. But yeah, I definitely value that space a lot. And yeah, there's something about just having this, like, unspoken connection with other people in that space. Like, you don't need to know everyone, you don't need to be having conversations with them the whole time, but just knowing that you guys are kind of working toward the same thing or have similar passions, I think that definitely affects the energy of a space and has some sort of impact in that space. So.
And I think that's interesting too, because you talked about a thing. I know in your work, we talked earlier once about it. You're really interested in connecting maybe two different entities into one, giving them a space for two intersecting entities to kind of communicate or have energy or interact with each other.
Yeah.
And so you already really highlighted a lot of the social aspects of libraries. So how much does this kind of unspeakable connection, how does that play in your work or in your practice?
Man, that's interesting. So what I like to do is I like to make things that are generally functional, things that are more sculptural or just kind of sit somewhere and you mainly look at it or kind of interact with it. Visually, it's not, like, I enjoy making those kinds of things, but for me it's not as like thrilling as something that someone will pick up and like use in their home. The reason I'm like really attracted to planters or pots for like a living organism is this connection between like a material object and a living object, living in a space together. And yeah, I think that, I don't know, I just think it's much more interesting when there's like layers and there's more depth to something, and the idea of conjoining two things. I don't know, there's a lot more to discover there, I think. And so for me, I think of like my parents who are very different. Like my dad is like the cowboy type who loves being outside, and like we have a farm and that's like his favorite thing in the world.
And isn't your dad's from Argentina?
He's from Oklahoma, but my mom is from Colombia.
Okay.
Yeah, and she's like a diva type and like loves going out to like social things and like being, I don't know, she would just love like parties and doesn't really care for like getting dirty and that sort of thing. And like they're still married and they somehow make that work, and it's still a mystery to me like how they actually get along when they have very few like common daily interests. But I think there's something nice about like how like she's like very sophisticated and classy, and he's like much more rugged and like even like dirty sometimes. Like his work, he's just like gets dirty, and like they just like you can see it in their home. Like it's both of those things, and you can see it in their marriage. And so I think that my work definitely comes from that a lot. Just like this desire to like bring two very different things together, and hopefully someone can see that or kind of think about it when they see it. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, definitely. I think one question I've been thinking a lot about lately is what's kind of the difference between a curation and a library collection. And I think what's interesting about asking these artists is, in a way, these resources that you found in the library and these times that you had in the library, that collection or that space provided something that helped you, that became part of your identity and part of your practice, and just the way that your parents, all of those things about them, they became part of your identity. You didn't exactly choose them. And so, kind of that difference between what do you see the difference between a collection of things and a, choosing to bring certain things in?
Right.
How do you see that? It's kind of a difficult question. I might take that out, actually. I haven't quite figured out that question. I think, let's talk about resources that you can remember using in the library.
I remember like checking the database just for the artist names and trying to see which books they had in any of the libraries on campus. And then
part of that question, and you talked about earlier about sometimes you couldn't find who you wanted. What can you talk about an instance when you were looking for somebody and you couldn't find it?
Yeah, one of the artists was a Japanese ceramicist. His name is Ken Mihara, and he has like a lot of things online, but I don't know if he's just like not well known enough for books, but it seems like he has enough of a reputation to be mentioned somewhere, but he wasn't mentioned anywhere. And then the other one was, I can't think of her name now. She's like briefly mentioned in one book, and it wasn't really relevant, but I remember there's like Richard Deacon and think 10 per year, they both had like tons of books. And so that was also a little overwhelming because it was like, oh, there's too much information. But there was something about the person that I couldn't find that made me want like more on him, or just like I felt more of a desire to like know more about his work because it felt more mysterious than the other two guys who had like an abundance of information. And in some ways it made me feel like, oh, everyone knows who they are, because they're very famous, they're very well-known sculptors. Yeah, but I don't think there was anything at the OU libraries.
So you became more interested because there wasn't really, you couldn't find any memories in the database
Right.
of this person, and so that made you more interested. Is finding in your practice, is finding things that maybe have been forgotten or overlooked, is that important to you?
Maybe. I haven't ever really thought about that. Like, I usually keep a sketchbook. I don't have it with me, but, and I know this is something like other artists have experienced, like just in conversations with them, but, you know, sometimes I make note of something or I draw something up and forget about it and then flip back through it and see it and it's like inspiring again. Or I do a lot of like screen captures on my phone of like images that I've seen, and just have so many that I don't really go through them on a weekly basis. Like, it's very rare that I go back through them. And sometimes I look at an image and that same like feeling comes back, and that same like moment of inspiration comes back. And so that's probably the only way that I can really think of like how memories or going back to something that's forgotten comes back in my work. But
and you work with forms that they have, you know, subtle differences in their, you know, can you kind of talk about that, about the way that you develop your forms? Because I know you do a lot of work with the wheel, or so how does that kind of like muscle memory, you know, how does that affect?
Yeah, totally. So I used to make a ton of these like cone shapes, which like I have them there, but I made like 200 over the span of less than a year, and it was kind of like all I knew, you know, like I just was making only that, and I felt like it was time to step away and do something different, and I didn't make one for a really long time, and one day I was just throwing and didn't know what to make and just made one, you know, just really quickly, and it was a lot easier because I had gotten better at my throwing technique by then. But it's the shape that I just really enjoy for some reason. It's they're never the same. Like, they never look exactly the same, which sometimes frustrates me. Like, I want them to have like this, I have like an ideal shape in my head, but it's very rare that it happens. And then yeah, I don't know, I throw a lot of like cylinders and like cups or planter type shapes, and I could get very technical and like make them all this exact same, but there's, I don't know, you lose a lot with that. I think there's something nice about just the fact that it is handmade and it's imperfect, and they are all unique even though there are similarities. So yeah.
Just had another question about it. I'm gonna go a little bit over because
You're totally fine.
yeah, I just had a question to ask you. Maybe I'll come back to it. Okay, let's see. So,
I did have a question though.
Yeah.
So like, what's the difference? You asked earlier, this was a question you like took out, but I'm like still thinking about it.
Yeah.
Are you asking me if there's like a difference that I see between a collection and a curated selection of things? Like, I don't know what the technical differences are, but
I just see, so, you know, kind of, this gets back into the thing is, what's the difference between a library? You know, a library has things that are there for people to, I mean, why do we call library collections, and why do we call exhibitions? You know, why are exhibitions? You know, what's really the heart at that, at the difference of that, and I think, something that we talked about earlier was that library is there for, it has a very specific, whoever's collecting, whoever's adding stuff to that, they have some specific things about the people that are coming in,
Mm-hmm.
but like you said, there's still some things that slip through the cracks.
Yeah.
It's still like, so, I guess kind of like, I mean, I still haven't figured out, this question, but, I
like thinking about it, you know, like I've been trying to think, because when I think about like my home or even like the things that I make,
mm-hmm.
I would like the idea of like all of them together to kind of look nice together, which they don't. Like
mm-hmm.
there's just some things that stand out. It's like, what is that? Like this one thing I made for an art assignment.
Mm-hmm.
But things that I make for myself on my own time, they all generally kind of go together. They have like choices of like similar styles or technique or something or colors. But like my house, like I think of it as like curating. Like it's a slow process of like adding things that aren't all the exact same, but like kind of feed into the same I don't know, energy or feeling that I want to create in my house. And for someone else, like they can come in and they don't feel comfortable at all, but for me it's like very comfortable. And I think curations are more of like, I don't know, more about that, like the feelings and the experience, than like a library collection is much more functional.
Definitely.
And so I don't know.
That really goes back to what you said earlier about how you want to combine the functional or the use. Like you're really interested in like the story of the use.
Right.
You're kind of interested in how people are going to use your pieces, and I think that inspires you a lot. And you can think of this show as kind of asking the next question of, when you have a collection, what then happens
right
after? What are the things that happen after that? What are the stories that happen after that? So kind of going back to resources that you found helpful, can you think of any strong connections where your resources or like your research in the library affected your work or your practice?
Like in that library specifically?
Or just the resources that you found in that library?
There was a book that my friend Haley checked out for an assignment that we had, and she just had it on her table, and I would flip through it sometimes. And it was like maybe from the 80s or 90s, and it just had like little sketches of like how to do different ceramic things, and some of them were really bizarre and like some were really interesting, like, oh, I would have never ever tried that. And so it kind of got me thinking like about all the different things that we're not learning here, because we can't learn everything in our classes. Like we learn a lot, but there's so much more out there. And so there's like one technique that I tried where you like hang a piece of fabric and like lay a flat piece of ceramic, like a slab, and it takes the shape of that fabric. And I mean, it ended up looking terrible and I hated it, but it was like worth the try for sure. And so that's probably like the most influential book, because it was kind of quirky. Like I loved the hand-drawn pieces and like, or the sketches in it, and the description of things were it just had a quirky language. Other than that, I mean, just the books that discuss different like ceramic artists that I found for my capstone work was nice, like knowing like their history, like their personal history. Or so like, for example, one artist didn't start out as an art student or in ceramics at all. Like they were doing something completely unrelated to fine arts, and then they got into ceramics much later, which is kind of like what happened with me. And so that definitely inspires me, because it's hard when you see a lot of people who've been doing ceramics for 4 years, and they seem to know like what they want and are doing great. And I feel like I just discovered that much later, but a lot of people do that. So yeah, I mean, mainly those those books are the only ones I can really think of with the library. But yeah, I haven't used it a whole lot. I don't know. That's all I can think of.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think that's all I need
Okay,
right now. So
cool.
that's good.
What's that recorded, all of it?
And then if you want to mail me that, email me that.
Yeah.